Hello, everyone in Idaho. My name is Rochelle Davis, and I am currently in Missouri. I'm recording this just because my son, who is 6 years old, he I think has COVID. We have not done a test yet for him, but we're quite sure it's pretty rampant in his school right now. So anyway, I do want to thank real quick Pat Bruder and the entire board for allowing me to speak today, and also for allowing me to go ahead and record this beforehand. Just it's a lot easier for me doing this a few days beforehand while my husband can help me out with my son. I will just get right to it. I know that some of you might have some questions after my short presentation, and if you do, I will at the end of my presentation give you my contact information. So please feel free truly to contact me, call me, text me, email me, find me on social media, however it works for you would be great. But definitely if you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer them. So today I am talking about what private investigators must know in order to connect families back together. And that is primarily what I do. I'm a licensed private investigator in Missouri and in Kansas. And I have a son who I've already spoken about, and he's adopted. We adopted him whenever he was born. We took him home from the hospital. But my husband and I ended up having to hire a private investigator in order to locate his birth father in order for the adoption to then move forward. That's another story for another time. But in doing that, I decided at the time I was working as a crime analyst, and I wanted to try to do as much of the same work as possible, but just in a different way in the private sector instead of the public sector. And so I got my PI license first in Missouri, then in Kansas back in 2016. And I've been doing this ever since. And really, the majority of my cases are adoptees who call me and want to be reconnected with their biological family members. So that's what I'm talking about today. So really, I want to start by saying that what I do is just as much of a counseling endeavor as it is an investigative one. There's a lot of hand holding. There's a lot of guiding and kind of gently guiding. It's just kind of it's a different bear. So I know a lot of you probably, do other kinds of work. A lot of you work with attorneys and different things, or, insurance or whatever the case may be. So this is sort of a specialty just in and of itself. And it's something that really is pretty unusual. So I want to kind of just walk through a typical, if somebody calls me, a client calls me, and most of the time it's an adoptee looking for biological family members. Sometimes it is a birth parent who is in search of the child that they placed for adoption. But most of the time it's the other way around. So that's kind of how I'm going to have things set up today. So the first thing is really to set my client up for success. That's the most important step, is really this first step, because before I take them on as a client, I want to know that they are going to be able to handle the investigation. They're going to be able to handle their emotions and the potential outcomes. So we go through that together, and I talk to them up front. Okay, here are all the different things that could happen as a result of me doing this search for you. So we talk about just having an unsuccessful search. We talk about all the way from your birth parents could be alive and welcome you with open arms, and they've been searching for you, and this is the happiest day of their life. Or it could be total rejection. The family could be made up of pretty unsavory characters. There could be hostility involved. There could be flat out denial involved. The birth parents could be deceased. So there are just so many different potential outcomes that I want my client to know and to be prepared for all of those outcomes. And I want my client to feel like I'm a good fit for them, and I want me to feel like they're a good fit for me. I do sometimes guide people to go a different direction, or ask them to maybe think on things and contact me later once they feel a little bit more secure in their decision to search. So that's always my first step. My next step is to ask just absolutely exhaustive questions. This is really important because there have been times, especially early on, when I took an adoptee client on and asked them lots of questions and thought I had all the information from them. But then as the investigation evolved, certain things would come out of their mouth, like, oh yeah, well, I didn't tell you this, and I didn't tell you, oh, I have this information. And I was like, what? So I always at the beginning, again, go through and ask them just a very exhaustive list of questions as to what information they have. Some adoptees who contact me really have pretty much zero information. And the information I'm referring to is information about their adoption. Things like, do they know anything about their biological parents or family members, anything at all, where they came from, a first name, anything, their age at the time, their religion, anything at all, because some of that information really can help as more information develops. It can just help to verify that I'm on the right track or I'm not. So just going through that exhaustive list of questions, I'm happy to share those with any of you guys if you'd like to see kind of a list of what I typically start out with. And then something else that I'd like to just point out with adoption cases, just because of the nature of these cases, you have to keep in mind that every bit of information that you come across might not exactly be gospel truth. I'll talk a little bit about original birth certificates, but if I have an original birth certificate for someone who's been adopted, and an original birth certificate is that very first birth certificate that they are issued. Some of you maybe don't know that this is a thing, but if you're adopted, you have an original birth certificate and then you have an amended birth certificate. The amended one is the one where the adopted parents are listed as the parents. So the original one typically lists at least the biological mother. Sometimes it lists the biological father. A lot of times it doesn't. But taking information you find as absolute truth, you just can't do that in these cases. I've come across on original birth certificates before where the spelling of the birth mother's name is wrong, or one of the given names for the birth mother is completely false. Age is one that is very often false for different reasons. A 16-year-old girl might lie and say that she's 18 or something like that. Sometimes the completely incorrect birth father, it'll have a father's name on that certificate, but it's actually not the birth father. Maybe that was on purpose, maybe not. So there's just all kinds of different bits of information you might come across whenever we're talking about adoptions, especially back in time, further and further in time. You just have to kind of keep that in mind. And as you're seeking information and gathering information, if there's something that doesn't seem like it fits, maybe it's because it's not true. And also don't get hung up on, I know that the birth mom had listed on the birth certificate that she was 17 years old. And this person, everything else fits except her age doesn't fit. This woman is 2 years, younger. Don't get hung up on things like that. And then, okay, so it really depends on the information that a client has to start out with that will determine the next steps in the investigation. So if a client really does not have very much information at all, I do talk about registering their DNA. There are plenty of people out there, adoptees and otherwise, who really don't have any hope for a search without DNA. So there are people for privacy purposes that are not comfortable registering their DNA, which is absolutely fine. But sometimes that might mean at least for now, that's, really the only option. So I discussed that with them. And again, this presentation has to be pretty quick, so I can't really go into it, but registering your DNA, I would choose ancestry.com. I'm not trying to plug them over the other ones, but just simply because they have the most robust database. That's who I would go with. 23andMe is a great one. Some other great ones, Family Tree DNA, My Heritage. So there are several out there. And again, I'm happy to answer more questions, more specific to these different DNA database providers. But sometimes registering their DNA is the way to go. So I get them set up with that, walk them through it if they need to be walked through it. And then once their results come in, then we can kind of get things started. Some of the resources I really use pretty much with every one of these cases. I have a subscription to newspapers.com, which is extremely, extremely helpful, especially for adoptions of a more historical nature. And I guess, I don't know if that's the right term, but adoptions that were done, prior to like 1970 and kind of back beyond that. Used to, people put everything in newspapers, and other really helpful things that are in newspapers and also other places on the web are obituaries. Obituaries are complete gold with these kinds of cases, because you can really start putting together family connections and just all kinds of stuff. There's so much information in obituaries. I use Facebook a tremendous amount. If you're not on Facebook, or really not, you don't use it much, it is just, even if the person I'm seeking is not on Facebook, chances are a close friend of theirs is, a close family member, their children, and not just Facebook, but Facebook is a big one, again, where you can glean so much information. Yearbooks, old yearbooks, I found really great information and photos with yearbooks, which you can find a whole host of different places on the web. Property records, that's been something where if you have an original birth certificate, birth mom's name is listed on there. A lot of times her address at the time was listed on there. So if you can go back and you can find property records during, the year that your client was born, and try to figure out, okay, they lived at this address and it says that this couple owned this house, then maybe that couple is your adoptee's grandparents or birth parents, so property records are really great too. So again, obtaining that original birth certificate, kind of going back to that, every state is different how they handle original birth certificates. There are some states that don't allow an adoptee any access to their original birth certificate. There are others, you just have to fill out a form and send in a fee of $15 or something like that. It really, there's 50 states and there's 50 different ways to do it. So I do have on my website, which I'll share at the end of my presentation, I do have a list of all the states and kind of what their laws are and how they handle that. And that's changing all the time. I'm in Missouri. Missouri just changed in the last couple of years. But a lot of people do have access. A lot of adoptees do have access to their original birth certificate. So that is certainly something to look into, because that'll at least give you a birth mother's name to kind of get started. And then another step in this is contacting either the adoption agency or the state to try and get any information from them that they'll give you. Sometimes they won't give you anything. Sometimes they'll give you some non-identifying information, which means they won't give you the name of the birth mom or the birth dad, but they'll give you kind of a social history, a health history, just kind of some different things, which can be absolutely wonderful to get all of that, because then if you can work and figure out the name part of it and pair those two things together, then you can develop a number one suspect as to who the birth mom, birth dad, who they are. And then really the last part is, once you have found the birth parent, is attempting to locate them and then to how to make contact. And that's something that personally with my own clients, I ask them to either allow me to call to make that first phone call, and the client and I talk about it on a very consistent basis, several conversations normally before I ever attempt to make that call. I'm actually, as soon as I'm done with this presentation, I'm going to attempt to call a birth mom for one of my clients. But just, I don't like to just give out personal information without that person, that subject of interest, without their permission. And it's always a shock for a birth parent to be contacted. It's going to typically happen out of the blue. They're going to get a phone call from this private investigator. So you want to do it in a very gentle way. I know I'm running out of time, so I really can't go through those steps. But again, happy to share that with any of you. And that's just the way that I choose to do it, to kind of protect myself. I protect my client and what that initial reaction could potentially be from the birth parent. And it also is a little less threatening for the birth parent to have kind of this disinterested third party contact them, rather than, someone calling them up and just saying, hey, I'm your biological daughter that you placed for adoption back in, 1973 or whatever. So that's kind of, in a very small nutshell, how an adoption search, how I go about doing an adoption search. I do have loads of blogs on my website that have a lot of information on how I conduct these adoption searches. You're welcome to obviously look me up and go there and find that information. And you're also welcome to email me, call me, let me know, who you are and that you saw this presentation, and that way I'll kind of know, what I've said and what you've heard. But again, my name is Rochelle Davis, and my website is found at www.newhopeinvestigations.com. That's the name of my company, New Hope Investigations. I'm on social media. My phone number is 417-499-7922. Call me, text me, whatever you'd like to do. I'd be real happy to hear from any of you. And I just want to say I appreciate you guys all listening, and hopefully it kept your attention. I know it was pretty rapid fire, but thank you again. I really am honored to be able to speak to you guys today. And I hope that you have a great day, and maybe we'll be talking soon. Bye-bye.